I never thought I'd be sitting here at 72 telling this story. But sometimes the things we keep inside eat away at us until we find the courage to speak our truth. My name is Martha Wilson. The folks here in Portland know me as Herbal Martha, the woman who runs that little herb shop on Hawthorne Boulevard, with remedies for everything from arthritis to anxiety. People see me now, independent, successful, surrounded by friends, and they have no idea what I survived to get here. They see my smile, hear my laugh, and admire the knowledge I've gathered over the years about healing plants and natural remedies. What they don't see are the scars, not the physical ones, though I have those too, but the invisible ones that took far longer to heal than my body ever did. Before I continue, I'd like to know who's listening to my story. Please share your name and where you're from in the comments below. I want to know who's brave enough to hear a truth that many prefer to ignore, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story, it's a warning about how the people we trust the most can sometimes hide the darkest secrets. You think you know your family, your children, their spouses, the people who share your home and your life, but sometimes the person sleeping under the same roof is a stranger wearing a familiar face, and by the time you discover the truth, it might be too late. My story begins 15 years ago, when I was still living in my little house in the suburbs of Portland. I had retired from teaching elementary school after 35 wonderful years shaping young minds. My husband, Edward, had passed away 3 years earlier, after 42 years of marriage. We'd had one daughter, Sarah, the light of our lives. She'd married Richard Bennett, a charming accountant with a winning smile and impeccable manners. When Edward died, Richard was a rock for both Sarah and me. He helped arrange the funeral, dealt with the paperwork, and checked in on me regularly. "You don't have to worry about anything, Martha," he'd say. "Your family, and family takes care of each other." How could I have known those words would take on such a twisted meaning? About a year after Edward's passing, I started having trouble with the stairs in my 2-story home. My knees weren't what they used to be, and the doctor warned me about living alone at my age. Sarah and Richard suggested I sell my house and move in with them. They had a beautiful home in a nice neckness with a guest suite on the first floor that would be perfect for me. "Mom, it makes sense," Sarah said. "You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or being alone if something happened. Plus, I'd love to have you closer." It seemed like the perfect solution. I sold my house, gave most of the furniture to charity, and moved into their guest suite with my personal belongings. The first few months were wonderful. I had my privacy but also company when I wanted it. Sarah and I would have coffee together in the mornings before she went to work. Richard would often work from home and check on me during the day. "You're like the mother I never had," he told me once. His own parents had died when he was young, and he'd been raised by distant relatives who hadn't shown him much affection. I felt special, needed, like I was filling a void in his life while also being closer to my daughter. But looking back, I should have noticed the small signs, how his hugs lasted a little too long, how his eyes lingered when I was in my robe, how he'd find excuses to enter my room without knocking. I dismissed these things, telling myself I was imagining things, that he was just being attentive. That night, as I went to bed, I couldn't possibly have imagined how my life was about to turn into a waking nightmare, or that the person I trusted would betray me in the most unimaginable way. I woke up that fateful morning with a strange heaviness in my body. When I tried to get out of bed, my left side wouldn't respond. I called out for help, my voice slurring strangely. Sarah had already left for work, but Richard was home. He found me trying to pull myself up with one arm, my face drooping on one side. "Martha, don't move," he said, instantly realizing something was wrong. He called 911, and within minutes, paramedics were rushing me to the hospital. I remember the lights of the emergency room, doctors speaking urgently, the word stroke being repeated. The neurologist later explained I'd had an ischemic stroke. A blood clot had blocked blood flow to part of my brain. The left side of my body was paralyzed. My speech was slurred, but understandable. I could still think clearly, but my body wouldn't respond the way it should. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "Mr. Bennett got you here quickly. With proper therapy and time, you could regain significant function, but you'll need care while you recover." I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by a month in a rehabilitation facility. Sarah visited whenever she could, but her job demanded long hours. Richard, however, was there almost every day. He spoke with the doctors, learned about my care needs, took notes during therapy sessions, and seemed genuinely concerned about my recovery. "Don't worry about anything," he assured me. "When you come home, I'll take care of everything. Sarah's job is demanding right now with that big merger, but I can work from home most days. I'll be your caregiver." The rehabilitation nurses taught him how to help me bathe, use the toilet, dress, and perform exercises to prevent muscle atrophy. He watched attentively, asked questions, took everything seriously. The staff praised his dedication. "You're so lucky to have such a devoted son-in-law," one nurse told me. "Most families put their loved ones in nursing homes after a stroke like yours." I felt grateful. But when I returned to Sarah and Richard's home, things began to change subtly. The first day he helped me bathe, his hands lingered too long on certain parts of my body. I told myself he was just being thorough, remembering what the nurses had taught him. But the next day, it happened again, his hands touching places they shouldn't, moving in ways that had nothing to do with cleaning. When I stiffened and tried to protest, he acted confused. "Martha, I'm just helping you get clean. The nurses said proper hygiene is essential to prevent infections. You don't want to get sick, do you?" His tone was reasonable, concerned even, but something in his eyes made my skin crawl. That first time he touched me inappropriately, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I wish I had trusted my instincts instead, because that moment was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. Within weeks, what began as accidental touches during bathing became deliberate, prolonged, and increasingly invasive. Richard always had a justification: checking for bed sores, improving circulation, preventing blood clots, ensuring proper cleaning. He spoke with such conviction, using medical terminology he'd picked up from the doctors, that sometimes I questioned my own perceptions. "Stroke patients often experience sensory misinterpretations," he would say when I objected. "Your brain is healing, Martha. What you're feeling isn't what's actually happening." The worst part was that I couldn't escape. My left arm and leg were still largely useless. I needed help getting in and out of bed, using the bathroom, bathing, dressing, even eating was difficult at first. Richard had positioned himself as my primary caregiver, and Sarah was working longer hours than ever. "It's just for a few months, Mom," she'd say during her brief visits to my room before or after work. "This merger is huge for my career. Richard is being so amazing taking care of you. I don't know what we'd do without him." I tried to tell her once, when Richard was out running errands. "Sarah," I said, my words still slightly slurred from the stroke, "something's not right with Richard's care." She looked concerned for a moment. Then her face softened. "Oh, Mom, the neurologist warned us about this. Confusion and paranoia can happen after a stroke. Richard is taking perfect care of you. Everyone at the hospital said so. But he—" I tried to continue. "Mom," she interrupted gently, "Richard gave up a huge client to work from home and take care of you. He's learning how to cook your favorite meals. He's spending hours researching stroke recovery. Please don't make this harder than it already is." I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the stress lines forming around her mouth. She needed to believe that everything was okay at home while she focused on her career. And Richard had crafted the perfect image of the devoted son-in-law. When I heard Sarah's door opening at night, I sometimes hoped she had finally realized the truth. But I didn't know then that my salvation would come from someone completely unexpected, someone outside our home entirely. As months passed, Richard became bolder. He started controlling every aspect of my life. Who could visit me? When I took my medication? What I ate? When I slept? He told Sarah I was too tired for visitors, that the doctor recommended limiting stimulation. He told friends and neighbors that I was making good progress, but needed rest. One by one, my connections to the outside world disappeared. My friend Beatrice came by once with flowers, but Richard told her I was sleeping. My former teaching colleague John called, but Richard said the phone's ringing agitated me. The home health nurse who was supposed to visit weekly was told her services weren't needed anymore because Richard had everything under control. Sarah's visits to my room grew shorter and less frequent. She was often traveling for work, and when home, she was exhausted. Richard encouraged her to rest rather than disturb me. He positioned himself as the martyr, sacrificing his time and energy to care for his mother-in-law, while his wife focused on her career. "You two are so lucky to have each other," Sarah would say, looking at us with gratitude before rushing off to another meeting. If only she knew what happened when she left the house. Richard would lock my door from the outside for my safety while he worked. He controlled my medication, often giving me pills that weren't prescribed by my doctor, pills that left me groggy and confused. When I refused to take them, he would pinch my nose until I opened my mouth, forcing the pills down my throat. "This is for your own good, Martha," he would say with that same concerned smile. "The doctor said, you need to stay calm for proper healing." I tried to resist in ways my limited mobility allowed. I pretended to sleep when he entered my room. I attempted to keep track of time and days by watching the sunlight move across my floor. I tried to regain strength in my left side through small exercises when I was alone, but progress was slow, and Richard seemed to notice any improvement immediately, adjusting my medication to keep me docile. The most disturbing development came about 6 months after my stroke. Richard entered my room late one night, when Sarah was away on a business trip. He sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair in a way that made my skin crawl. "We have a special relationship, Martha," he whispered. "Sarah doesn't understand the bond between a caregiver and their patient. What we have is intimate, private. No one would understand." That night, his violation crossed a boundary I had feared but hoped he would never cross. As I lay there, tears streaming down my face, unable to fight back with my weakened body, I realized the full horror of my situation. I was trapped in my own body, in my own home, with a predator who wore the mask of a caring family member. Sometimes I wondered if death would be kinder than this existence. But then I would think of Sarah, my beautiful daughter who had no idea of the monster she had married. I had to survive, had to find a way to expose the truth, not just for myself but for her too. During the darkest months of my captivity, I developed a strategy. I would pretend the medication affected me more than it actually did, giving me brief periods of clarity when Richard thought I was heavily sedated. I would try to make noise when I heard neighbors outside, hoping someone might become suspicious. I would accidentally knock things over when Richard was on work calls, trying to create disturbances that might alert others. But Richard was always one step ahead. He explained away any noise as part of my agitated episodes. He told neighbors my recovery included periods of confusion and outbursts. He positioned himself as the patient, long-suffering caregiver dealing with a difficult patient. And everyone believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was charming, articulate, respected in the community, and I was just a confused old woman who'd had a stroke. Sarah would visit my room briefly, usually with Richard present. I tried to communicate with my eyes, to somehow convey my desperation, but she was distracted, tired, and Richard always positioned himself as the protective, attentive caregiver. And Sarah, trusting her husband completely, would nod and leave, never knowing that she was abandoning me to my tormentor. I remember one particular evening when Sarah came home early from work. Unexpected. She walked into my room just as Richard was adjusting my blankets, his excuse for having his hands where they shouldn't be. For a brief moment, I thought salvation had arrived. Surely she would see, would understand what was happening. Richard, you're so attentive, she said, smiling. Mom is so lucky to have you. The look he gave me over her shoulder was triumphant. Who would believe my slurred accusations against his perfect performance? But as Sarah turned to leave, I managed to grab her hand with my good right hand. Help, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. A flicker of concern crossed her face. Mom, what's wrong? Before I could answer, Richard stepped in. She's been having a rough day. The doctor said emotional outbursts are common with brain injuries. I've been meaning to talk to you about increasing her anti-anxiety medication. Sarah looked uncertain for a moment, then squeezed my hand. It's okay, Mom. Richard is taking good care of you. I know this is hard. She misinterpreted my plea entirely, thinking I was simply frustrated with my condition. As she left the room, the brief hope I'd felt crumbled to dust. But little did I know, my salvation was just about to arrive from an unexpected source. Nancy Miller moved into the house next door about a year after my stroke. She was a retired nurse in her 60s, energetic and observant. She brought over a homemade casserole to introduce herself, and Richard, always careful about maintaining his public image, invited her in. My mother-in-law had a stroke last year, he explained, gesturing toward my room. She's recovering, but it's been challenging. I worked in neurological rehabilitation for 20 years, Nancy said. I'd be happy to say hello if she's up for visitors. Richard couldn't very well refuse without seeming rude. He brought Nancy to my room, staying close, controlling the interaction. But Nancy wasn't easily managed. Her experienced eyes took in everything. My positioning in bed, which wasn't optimal for preventing contractures, the lack of adaptive equipment that should have been present, the way I flinched when Richard touched my shoulder. That's very kind, Richard said stiffly, but we have a routine that works for us. Too many changes can be disruptive for stroke patients. Nancy nodded, but I saw the suspicion in her eyes. During that brief visit, she had observed more than Richard realized. As they left my room, I prayed that she had seen enough to question the situation. Over the next few weeks, Nancy found reasons to visit. She would bring over mail that had been mistakenly delivered to her house, ask to borrow a cup of sugar, or bring garden vegetables from an overabundant harvest. Each time, she would ask to say a quick hello to me. Richard could hardly refuse without raising questions, but he never left us alone. Then came the day that changed everything. Richard had a meeting he couldn't miss, an important client who insisted on meeting in person. Sarah was away at a conference. He gave me extra medication to ensure I'd be restful while he was gone, locked my door from the outside, and left. What he didn't know was that I had been secretly spitting out some of my medication for weeks, hiding the pills under my mattress. I was more alert than he expected. When I heard a knock at the front door, I summoned all my strength and called out as loudly as my weak voice would allow. By some miracle, Nancy had chosen that moment to bring over a book about herbal remedies for stroke recovery. She heard my faint cries and followed the sound to my door. Finding it locked from the outside, she became alarmed. Martha, are you okay? Why is your door locked? Help! I managed to call out. Please help. Nancy, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. She found the spare key Richard kept in the kitchen drawer and unlocked my door. What she saw horrified her. Me, unwashed, undernourished, with bruises on my arms and terror in my eyes. Oh my God, she whispered. What has he been doing to you? For the first time in over a year, I was alone with someone who wasn't my abuser. The words poured out, halting and slurred, but unmistakable in their meaning. I told her everything. The abuse, the isolation, the medications, the violations. I begged her not to leave me. Nancy's face hardened with determination. I'm calling 911 right now. He's never going to touch you again. When the ambulance took me away that day, I thought the worst was behind me. I had no idea that confronting my daughter with the truth would be almost as painful as the abuse itself. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, sirens blaring, I felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. Terror that Richard would somehow stop this rescue, convince everyone I was confused or lying. Relief that someone had finally seen the truth, that my nightmare might actually be ending. At the hospital, a team of doctors, nurses, and social workers took over. They documented my injuries, both old and new. They noted my malnourished state, the bed sores that had been allowed to develop, the inappropriate medications in my system. A neurologist assessed my condition and was shocked by how little proper rehabilitation I had received. With proper care and therapy, you should have made much more progress by now, he said gravely. Someone has been severely neglecting your medical needs. A sexual assault nurse examiner gently performed an examination that confirmed the ongoing abuse. Police officers took my statement, recording every painful detail. Throughout it all, Nancy stayed by my side, holding my good hand, reassuring me that I was safe now. Then came the moment I had been both longing for and dreading. Sarah arrived at the hospital, her face pale with shock and confusion. Richard had been taken in for questioning, and she had received a call from the police. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking as she entered my room. "What's happening?" "They're saying Richard. They're saying..." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The reality was too horrific to put into words. The trusted husband she adored was being accused of unspeakable crimes against her mother. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, accomplished daughter who had always been the center of my world, and saw her world crumbling before my eyes. Part of me wanted to protect her, to soften the blow somehow. But I couldn't lie, not after everything that had happened. "It's true," I said simply, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "All of it." Sarah collapsed into the chair beside my bed, her body shaking with sobs. "How? Why? I don't understand. He was so good to you. He gave up so much to take care of you." "It was all an act," I explained gently. "He created the perfect image while hiding the monster underneath. But I saw him caring for you every day. How could I not have known? How could I have left you with him?" The guilt in her voice was devastating. "He made sure you didn't see," I told her. "He timed everything perfectly. He isolated me. He convinced everyone, including you, that I was confused, that my perceptions couldn't be trusted. This isn't your fault, Sarah." But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. How could she not blame herself? She had brought Richard into our lives. She had left me in his care. She had dismissed my attempts to tell her something was wrong. The following weeks were a blur of medical treatments, police interviews, and court proceedings. Richard was arrested and charged with multiple felonies: elder abuse, sexual assault, false imprisonment, and more. The evidence was overwhelming once authorities started looking. The medication he had been giving me that wasn't prescribed. The unnecessary locks on my door. The witnesses who now recalled how he had systematically isolated me. Sarah filed for divorce immediately, but the damage to our relationship wasn't so easily repaired. She was consumed by guilt and shame. Barely able to look me in the eye, she arranged for me to receive the best care at a rehabilitation facility, but visited infrequently, each encounter awkward and painful. "I should have known," she would say, the same words repeated like a mantra of self-punishment. "I should have protected you." The day Richard's case went to court, the courtroom was filled with people. News of the case had spread throughout the community, shocking everyone who had known Richard as the devoted son-in-law. Sarah sat in the back row, unable to bring herself to sit near me, carrying the weight of her perceived failure. When the judge announced Richard's sentence, 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. But I knew then that, while justice had been served in the legal sense, the journey toward healing was just beginning. What I didn't realize at that moment was that true justice would take a different form. 15 years later, in a way I never could have anticipated, and that the path to recovery would lead me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. The rehabilitation facility was a stark contrast to the prison Richard had created for me. Here, the staff were professional, respectful, and genuinely committed to helping me regain independence. Every day brought a structured routine of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and counseling. For the first time in over a year, I was receiving proper care for my stroke. My body began to respond to the treatments. Slowly, movement returned to my left arm and leg. My speech became clearer. I learned to use adaptive equipment to compensate for remaining weaknesses. But the psychological healing was far more challenging than the physical. Nightmares plagued my sleep. I flinched when male staff members approached me. I had panic attacks during bathing, the memories of Richard's violations still raw and painful. The facility assigned me a trauma therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, who specialized in survivors of abuse. She helped me understand that my reactions were normal, that recovery from trauma wasn't linear, that healing would take time. "Martha, you survived something unimaginable," she told me. "You found the strength to endure and the courage to speak out. Those same strengths will help you rebuild your life." During this time, my relationship with Sarah remained strained. She had moved to a smaller apartment after selling the house where the abuse had occurred. She paid for my rehabilitation and made sure I had everything I needed, materially, but emotionally, she remained distant. Then one day, about 3 months into my rehabilitation, Dr. Chen suggested a joint therapy session. Sarah agreed reluctantly. That session was one of the most painful experiences of my life, but also the beginning of our healing. Sarah finally expressed the full weight of her guilt and shame. "I brought him into our lives," she sobbed. "I chose him. I left you alone with him. I didn't believe you when you tried to tell me. How can you ever forgive me? How can I ever forgive myself?" I reached for her hand with my now stronger right arm. "Sarah, you were a victim too. He manipulated both of us. He chose us specifically because of our close relationship, because he knew he could use your trust against me and my vulnerability against you. But I should have seen through him," she insisted. "Sociopaths like Richard are experts at deception," Dr. Chen interjected gently. "They specifically target kind, trusting people and create carefully crafted personas." Over many more joint sessions, Sarah and I began to rebuild our relationship. We learned to talk about what had happened, to share our pain instead of hiding it from each other. We cried together, raged together, and eventually began to heal together. 6 months after entering rehabilitation, I had made enough progress to consider my next steps. I couldn't return to teaching. My body still had limitations that would make classroom management impossible. I couldn't live alone yet. I still needed some assistance with daily activities, and I certainly couldn't move back in with Sarah. Both of us needed space to heal. That's when Nancy Miller, the neighbor who had saved me, made an unexpected offer. She had a small mother-in-law cottage behind her main house that was sitting empty. "You could have your independence but still have someone nearby if you need help," she suggested. "And I could use the company, to be honest. Being retired isn't as fulfilling as I'd hoped." It was the perfect solution. Nancy understood trauma from her years in nursing. She respected my boundaries while providing support when needed. Most importantly, she had been the one person who had seen through Richard's facade, which made her the one person I felt completely safe with. Moving into Nancy's cottage marked the beginning of my new life. With Sarah's financial support and Nancy's friendship, I began to explore what this next chapter might look like. What could a retired teacher with a partially disabled body but a fully active mind do to find purpose again? The answer came unexpectedly. During my recovery, I had become fascinated by the herbal remedies Nancy used to supplement my conventional treatments. A tea she made from lemon balm that helped calm my anxiety. A salve with arnica that eased the pain in my weakened muscles. a tincture of valerian that helped me sleep without nightmares. Where did you learn all this? I asked her one day, as she prepared a ginger compress for my arthritic hand. My grandmother was an herbalist in rural Kentucky, she explained. She taught me that nature provides remedies for many ailments if you know where to look. I studied nursing to understand the science, but I never abandoned the traditional knowledge. Nancy offered to teach me what she knew, and I threw myself into learning with the enthusiasm of a student discovering a new subject. We spent hours in her garden, growing healing plants. She taught me to identify wild herbs, to harvest at the right times, to prepare tinctures, salves, and teas. I read every book I could find on herbal medicine, combining my educator's love of research with my new passion. As I learned, I also continued to heal. Physical therapy had restored much of my mobility, though I would always walk with a slight limp, and my left hand would never regain its full dexterity. The nightmares became less frequent. I could now bathe without panic attacks. Sarah and I continued our healing journey as well. She had thrown herself into her career after the divorce, working even longer hours than before. But gradually, she began to find balance again. Our weekly dinners became a tradition we both looked forward to. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our trust in each other and in the world. 2 years after moving into Nancy's cottage, I felt ready for more independence. Sarah had received a substantial settlement in her divorce from Richard. The house had been sold, and his assets had been liquidated to pay restitution to me and legal fees. She offered to help me find my own place and set up a small business. "What would you like to do, Mom?" she asked during one of our dinners. "You've always been happiest when teaching others." The answer was clear to me by then. I wanted to share what I had learned about healing plants, to help others find natural remedies for their physical and emotional pain. Within months, Herbal Martha's opened in a small storefront on Hawthorne Boulevard. I sold herbal preparations, taught workshops, and offered one-on-one consultation. To my surprise, the business thrived. People were drawn not just to the products, but to the knowledge and compassion I offered. Many of my customers became friends. Some even shared their own stories of trauma and recovery, sensing in me a fellow survivor who would understand. As the years passed, my little shop became something of a community center. I started a support group for survivors of abuse that met monthly in the back room. I worked with local women's shelters to provide calming teas and salves to those who had recently escaped violent situations. I taught classes on herbal medicine at the community college, passing on what I had learned to a new generation. Sarah eventually met someone new, a kind, gentle woman named Olivia, who treated her with respect and love. When they married 5 years after my rescue, I stood proudly beside my daughter, grateful that she had found healthy love after such betrayal. Life settled into a new normal that I would never have imagined during those dark days of captivity. I had my shop, my friends, my purpose. Sarah and Olivia visited regularly. Nancy remained my dearest friend until her peaceful passing in her sleep 10 years after she had saved my life. I thought my story had reached its conclusion. The nightmare endured, survival achieved, a new life built from the ashes of the old one. But life had one more chapter to write, one that would bring my journey full circle in the most unexpected way. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 15 years after my rescue. I was arranging a new display of immune-boosting teas for the upcoming flu season when the bell above the shop door jingled. I looked up with my usual welcoming smile, only to have it freeze on my face. There, leaning heavily on a walker, was Richard Bennett. He was gaunt, his once handsome face now haggard and lined. His hands trembled visibly on the walker's handles. But despite the physical changes, I would have known him anywhere. Those eyes, calculating even in their current desperation, had haunted my nightmares for years. My assistant Jenny noticed my expression and stepped forward protectively. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. "Martha," he said, his voice weaker but still recognizable. "I need to talk to you." Jenny looked at me questioningly. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the counter. It's okay, Jenny. Why don't you take your lunch break now? Once we were alone, I faced the man who had once held absolute power over me. You shouldn't be here, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. There's a restraining order. I know, he said, lowering himself painfully into a chair near the door. It expired when I was released. I'm not here to hurt you. I couldn't even if I wanted to. He gestured at his frail body with a bitter laugh. What do you want, Richard? I remained behind the counter, maintaining a safe distance. I'm dying, he said bluntly. Multiple sclerosis. Diagnosed in prison 5 years ago. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue, wondering why he thought his impending death should matter to me. I have no one, he continued. My family is long gone. No friends, no money. I'm staying at a state-funded hospice, but they can only provide basic care. His eyes met mine, pleading. I need help, Martha. Real care. Someone who knows what they're doing. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Here was my tormentor, the man who had abused me under the guise of care, now genuinely needing the care he had only pretended to provide. Why come to me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you understand suffering, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because despite everything, you were always kind. Because I have nowhere else to turn. In that moment, looking at the pathetic figure before me, I felt something shift inside. Not forgiveness, never that. But a realization of just how completely our roles had reversed. Once, he had held all the power, and I had been utterly dependent. Now he was the vulnerable one, and I stood strong. Do you remember what you did to me? I asked quietly. Do you remember how you violated my trust, my body, my very humanity? Do you remember how you isolated me from my daughter, made me believe I was losing my mind, used my disability to satisfy your sick desires? He lowered his eyes. I was sick. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't erase 15 years of nightmares. I replied. Sorry doesn't give me back the year of my life you stole. Sorry doesn't repair what you did to my relationship with my daughter. I know, he whispered, but I'm asking anyway. Please, Martha. I'm afraid of dying alone. Afraid of suffering without anyone who cares. As I looked at Richard, this shell of the man who had once terrified me, I felt something unexpected. Not hatred, not fear, not even pity, just freedom. Freedom from the power he had once held over me. Freedom from the fear that had lingered even after all these years. No, I said simply. I will not help you. His face crumpled. Please, I'm begging you. I have no one else. You're a healer now, he said, his voice breaking. You help people. That's what your shop is all about, isn't it? Healing and second chances. I moved out from behind the counter, standing tall, despite my slight limp. In that moment, I felt more powerful than I had in years. Yes, I am a healer. I help people who deserve second chances, people who are victims of circumstances beyond their control, people who have made mistakes but truly want to change. You are none of those things. You made calculated, deliberate choices to hurt someone vulnerable who trusted you. His eyes darkened with anger. A glimpse of the real Richard beneath the pitiful facade. After everything I did for you, you did nothing for me, I cut him off. Everything you did was for yourself, for your own sick gratification. And now you come here expecting mercy? Expecting me to care for you when you're vulnerable, just as you cared for me? He tried a different approach, his voice suddenly soft, reasonable, the same tone he'd used during my captivity to make me doubt my own perceptions. Martha, I know what I did was wrong. I've had 15 years to think about it. But doesn't your faith teach forgiveness? Don't you believe people can change? Forgiveness is not the same as trust, I replied. And it certainly doesn't obligate me to put myself in harm's way again. Whatever peace you're looking for, Richard, you won't find it here. I walked to the door and held it open. There are state programs for people in your situation, hospice care for those without resources. I suggest you look into those options. But do not come here again. His face contorted with rage, briefly showing the monster I remembered. You vindictive bitch! After all this time? Goodbye, Richard, I said firmly, unflinching in the face of his anger. The years had taught me that his words could no longer hurt me. He struggled to his feet, his legs shaking with the effort. As he shuffled past me toward the door, he paused, leaning close. You think you've won, don't you? He hissed. But look at you, old, scarred, alone. What kind of life is that? I smiled then, genuinely. It's a life I built myself, on my own terms. It's a life filled with purpose, respect, and real love. All things you'll never know. That's not winning, Richard. That's thriving. I called Sarah that evening to tell her about Richard's visit. She was alarmed at first, worried about my safety, but I assured her I was fine. 6 months later, I read Richard's obituary in the local paper. He had died alone in a state-run hospice facility. I felt no joy at the news, but no sadness either. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a dark chapter had finally, completely closed. That evening, Sarah and Olivia came over for dinner. As we sat in my small garden behind the shop, surrounded by the healing plants that had given me a new purpose, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. No, I corrected gently, raising my own glass. To thriving, and that's what I want all of you to understand. Survival is just the beginning. It's what comes after, the rebuilding, the reclaiming of joy, the discovery of new purpose that truly matters. I'm 72 years old now. The stroke left its mark on my body, and Richard's abuse left its mark on my soul. But those marks aren't the end of my story. They're just part of the journey that made me who I am. My name is Martha Wilson. I survived the unimaginable, but more importantly, I discovered that survival was just the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of my life. And if I could find that strength within myself at 57, imagine what you might discover within yourself, no matter your age or circumstances. The true victory isn't just in escaping abuse, it's in building a life so full and rich that the abuse becomes just one chapter in a much longer, beautiful story. That's not just surviving, that's thriving.